What is up everyone, welcome back to a brand new video today on Lex Alexas. Today I am going to wrap up my thoughts of the Championship 21-22 season by ranking every single team that has had their season this year, rating if I think it's been a great season or has it been a stinker of a season. Let's go straight into the rankings. So the tiers are as follows. We have got promotion as the top tier, great being the second tier, average being the third tier, meh being the second to last tier, and awful being the lowest tier. Pretty self-explanatory on what these ratings are going to signify. But of course, this is only my opinion. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts and the opinion of your club season in the comments down below. If you guys like what you see, please give the video a like. It does tremendously help the channel. Please do hit the subscribe button if you've not done so. It does really help the channel. And please also share the channel to as many people as you can. All of that helps too. Without any further ado, let's give you my thoughts on how I think every single team in this championship season has done. So I've started from random order, so I'm going to start off with Queen's Park Rangers first, and actually I think it's a good time for me to speak about Queen's Park Rangers because it is looking like it's very strong that next season they're going to have John Beale, the assistant head manager of Aston Villa, or formerly the Aston Villa assistant manager, as he would take on his first ever job as a first team manager at QPR. QPR fans, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I don't personally have any expectations. I don't even really know how well he will be able to do with QPR. But if I'm basing it on their season, they are looking at this season thinking that they had a good amount of potential. They ended last season very well. And it was continued into this year. But you would argue, even with players going at AFCON and with the injuries, that they did fall slightly short for what I felt that they were capable. And they, I think I know deep down, fell down as well with the quality players they had in that squad of Chair, Willock at one stage playing unbelievably well as well. I think the options they had, I think they should have finished higher than the 11th place finish that they finished in the championship this year. As a grade, it's quite tricky to be honest, because I think typically if you see an 11th place finish for QPR, you put it as average because you would pretty much expect them to finish in around that level. But I think for what was promised of them, I don't think it's been an awful season on their parts. I just think it's been a bit meh. I think it's just fallen a little bit short for what I think could have been a really good season for Rangers. Next up is Hull City. Now, undoubtedly, they're probably going to have one of the biggest summers out of all of the championship clubs with brand new ownership there. There's definitely a lot of promise. There's definitely a lot of rumours going around in terms of players that they could potentially sign. But at this moment of time, if we're comparing to this season alone, I expected them to get relegated. They did not get relegated. And I think Hull's expectation at the start of the season would have been to stay up. They did stay up a little bit more comfortably than their position suggests in 19th place. I think it's helped by the bottom three this year wasn't necessarily the best in quality. But they had a really good run at one stage at home with Grant McCann. And then when Shota Advasi came in, they had a period of 4 wins in a row. And those two forms have pretty much given Hull City this leverage to survive. Consistency-wise, I think there's still a lot of work to be there. But they did manage to survive pretty comfortably in the end. I don't think that warrants a meh season. I actually think it's been pretty average. People would even argue that they deserve a good season for surviving. But I think based on what they are capable of, I think that position is average. I don't think they've necessarily amazed everyone for how well they've been this season, but I definitely think next year, now that expectations are going to be set, it's going to be very interesting and it's going to be much easier to grade Hull City for a championship season. We now go on to Coventry City, and already I'm going to put them in great. They have had a fantastic season. They may feel a bit disappointed that they fell as low down as 12th, you know, when at the start of the season, or the first half, I should say. But they were right up there in the top 6. Their form did slowly but surely drop off a bit. They had a poor win this run away from home at one stage. And then in the end of the season, they started to have a really good away record, which was actually outperforming their home record. And at one stage, they had the best record at home in the league. Unbelievable, really. They're having patches of good form. And I definitely think Gyökeres going forward is a great striker. Already got a lot of interest from Championship and Premier League clubs, so it'll be interesting to see if they keep them on there. I think Coventry, if they get their recruitment right and they keep all their players in, or necessarily a majority of their players, I think they can have another great season. It just seems a club that's going on a positive momentum. And I think as long as Coventry approach this transfer window right, I think they'll still continue to defy the odds. And it has been a really good season, a great season for Coventry. Now for Barnsley, this one's going to be very quick and simple. It's been an awful season for Barnsley. When you consider that the year before they overachieved massively with Ishmael in charge, finishing 5th place in the Championship, falling short in the semi-final. And this is what I was talking about when I was actually doing my live stream between Forest and Huddersfield Town. A lot of the times, you do typically see one team that loses out in the playoffs, whether it's the final or semi-final, have a really bad season the next year. Could Huddersfield fall into that phase? I mean, for their sake, they would hope not. But Barnsley, I think because expectations were set, they automatically buckled under the pressure. Shop was a new manager, which they were still going by the record of bringing unknown managers in. It just didn't turn out to really get the right results, unfortunately, for Barnsley there. They lose their manager and their captain, and two key influential figures in Ishmael and Moat, both to West Brom. So I think ultimately Barnsley, for the fact they really couldn't really replace that, it was always going to be a very, very tough season. And I can't believe I didn't even foresee that in my predictions, but it has been pretty awful. To only pick up 30 points all season is really embarrassing. So unfortunately, I think Barnsley's going to have to go into the awful tier. Blackpool is a very interesting one. I think for me, based on the expectations, they have to go to great. They were on paper the lowest ranked team going into the Championship in this year, obviously getting promoted by the League One playoffs. And with the budget they had and the limited recruitment that they had in terms of improving the quality of the squad, they relied a lot of their signings on lower league players. So they did have a big amount of risk in that. But Blackpool under Critchley, I just think is a match made in heaven. They had a poor start, but then whilst they had a good couple of results, I know they beat Fulham at one stage of the season. They managed to get a 2-goal comeback against Bournemouth as well, which are two teams that have got promoted out of the Championship. So Blackpool being able to turn it on against some really top teams this year. So they make themselves a really big threat for next season. But likewise with Coventry, they've got to get the recruitment right. They've got to try and keep as many of their key players as they can, because a lot of players make themselves tick. Ekipta at the back has done well. CJ Hamilton has done well in that wide area. Josh Bowler as well. Both are going to be full of interest there. Lavery's popped in with a couple of goals as well. A lot of their players have done really, really well this year. But if they lose one of those key influential players, it could be a really tough season for Blackpool next year. Bristol City. Now, the thing is with Bristol City these days, they don't really enter the heights of like mid-table or the higher part of the table anymore. So it's hard for me to summarize how they've done this year. They finished in 17th place. So for me, I think that has got to be, I would dare say average, but I still think a mare. I still think the players they should do better than 17th place. What's been an issue for Bristol City is just consistency. If they can work on consistency, then they could definitely be a better team next year. I don't know if the change of manager is going to help. They've already brought good investment in, getting Naismith in from Luton Town. Now, the thing is, that's one good signing at the back, but they need more than that. Defensively, they have been an issue as well, conceding the most chances per 90. So I don't know if Naismith is going to automatically improve that. They definitely need a lot more players, in my opinion, but whether it's going to be a change of manager, Bristol City fans, let me know what you think about the situation of your club in the comments down below. Now for Stoke City, it's so difficult again, a bit similar to Bristol City. I think even with their expectation, I wouldn't put it down as an awful season. They've had some good moments there, but ultimately it's just fallen short for what really should have been a better season for them. They've ultimately finished, exactly where they finished last year, in 14th place in the table. But unfortunately these days, I think the standards have dropped. I'm actually going to put them in average, but in the lower part of average and the higher part of meh. So Stoke City, they had a great bit of form near the beginning part of the season. They had a couple of really difficult injuries. Nick Powell being injured for a long time was a really big blow. Sutar being injured was a really bad injury for them as well. I really want to see Stoke City with a season where they don't really have a lot of players plagued with injuries. So I think at the moment they've not quite hit the mark, but I do think 14th place. They had a bit of an okay form near the end as well, so I think they salvaged a little bit there. But ultimately, it's still just been a bit underwhelming. I think that's the best way I can understand Stoke City's season. Now, Bournemouth, they will be going into the promotion category, but what I will say, a lot of pressure and expectations was put on this Bournemouth team. You know, they had a really good unbeaten start. They actually had the longest unbeaten run in the whole championship until they did lose out in their first game against Preston. And then since then, they actually had 3 defeats and 4. So Bournemouth, when they do lose their momentum, they can sometimes crumble. They spent a lot in January, got some players in, and you can arguably say those signings have been a really big difference in, you know, getting them promotion. Kiefer Moore, with the goals he scored in his last 2 games for Bournemouth, has been a really big player as well. I still don't know how I feel about them being in the Premier League, but I still think there is something there. They definitely need, for me, better defenders. I don't know about the goalkeeper situation. Travers has had a good season in the Championship, but whether he can perform in the Premier League, he's barely had any starts and appearances in the Premier League. So that's something worth noting as well. But Bournemouth have ultimately earned promotion, hence why they're going to be in the promotion tier. Birmingham now. Now, this one's tricky as well. I think a lot of the time you would put it down as meh. But I think with the optimism they had with Lee Bowyer, I'm really tempted to put it down in awful. I think likewise with Bristol City, I'm just going to put it down in the lower part of meh. But I might be tempted to switch Birmingham down to the awful tier depending what I'm rating the other teams. It's just, once again, it's same old story, isn't it? Just no progression. There's no full-term plan with this team. Very short-term. The low market they had in that January had a good start, but then ultimately they've still not been able to get the results to really put them in a respectable position. They finished 20th place, and ultimately with that squad, they should be doing better than that. And had Derby and Reading not got their points deductions, Birmingham would have gone down. So now that I think about it, I think they need to go to the awful tier now. I actually think they've really not done themselves and covered themselves in too much glory in my opinion. But Birmingham fans, let me know what you think of your season in the comments down below. Next, Luton Town. Now, obviously, they had a top 6 campaign. I think it's very easy for me to put them to have a great season. This team just refuses to, not improve their season. They had a terrific finish last year, finishing in 9th place of the table with their highest points tally. They beat their points tally again this year, and they even bettered their highest finish from last year and finished in 6th place. Luton Town with a top 6 campaign. I mean, that's incredible. The fact that Luton were actually 1 goal away from a playoff final and they were in the conversation of being a Premier League team is unbelievable. With their budget as well of being only £1 million actually in value when you're comparing to the hundreds of millions that Sheffield United is worth especially. It's unbelievable that Luton were in that conversation, and I think you've got to give all the plaudits to the squad and Nathan Jones. They deserve this great tier. They've had a fantastic season. Whether it's going to be the same this year, they've already lost Naismith, who was arguably one of their, or if not their best defender this year. So they've got to be very careful, Luton Town, in terms of who they're going to get in terms of investment in the transfer windows especially. But it has been a really good season for this Luton side. Preston now is quite tricky for me to summarise. I think it's been quite average. If you put it under, McAvoy, it would have been touch and go between meh and awful. But I think Ryan Lowe coming in, and it's actually coming at the right time, actually giving them a little bit of consistency. And I actually think with their positive momentum and where they finished in the table, it is a slight improvement for what they have done previously as well. They got Diaby back, which is good. But if they cannot get the likes of Iverson and also Archer back or Vandenberg, they're going to have to either look at the low market again, or they're going to have to really reinvest in some really talented players. Maybe go for someone like a Scott Twine, maybe. I mean, why not? He's a creative player. He can definitely play in as a sort of Cameron Archer-esque replacement there. So I definitely think Preston have had average season. I think that's for me. I think definitely had Rhino gone in sooner, maybe it would have been a better season. But I think when you're in a mid-table position and you expect to finish there, it's just been quite average. You can't necessarily say it's been a great season, because if it was a great season, you would defy your expectations. Now with Blackburn, this is going to be very tricky. So Lancaster rivals right there with Preston and Blackburn back to back. And for me, oh, it's so tricky again. I think Blackburn are going to be right at the top of the average, but I think, right at the end of great. Because Blackburn have improved their position dramatically in the last couple of years or so. But because of their poor form in the second half of the season, like they always do under Tony Mowbray, they could arguably say that it's been a pretty disappointing end and a disappointing season, because it did at one stage look like that they were highly likely to be in the top 6, even pushing for promotion. Ben Brereton Diaz was up there in the top 2 goal scorers. He's actually fallen down since then to the 4th and 5th top goal scorer, I believe, because he was needed for international work and he did have an injury as well. But other players in the squad couldn't chip in the goals, unfortunately. It's a good position finish, but considering where they were in January, it is quite a drop and a little bit disappointing in the end. But I think with the good and the bad, you average out your season. So I think they've had an average season at the end of it, but very close for it to be a great season. Swansea, now then, it's quite tricky. I think this year for Swansea's been a transition year. I mean, I could put it down as average, but I'm just going to put it at the top bit of May, in fact, I think with QPR. Because Swansea, obviously, if they really shouldn't finish, as low down as they did. 15th, compared to where they finished the year before, where they were right up in the top 6, is very disappointing. But with all things considered, they had to change a lot of their things. They lost a lot of their players like Andre Ayew and Mark Gueye. They had to get new players in, a new manager in as well. Cooper left as well. So it was a new system, new manager, new players, and ultimately things were not going to be very smooth. And at the start of the season, they weren't smooth at all. Russell Martin was actually under pressure sometimes. But the positive momentum we see for Swansea near the end of this season, it could mean that next year they could be a really good threat in terms of getting into that top half or even that top 6 place. But there's still that nagging feeling that I'm not too sure that they are going to be able to compete, because I actually think the top 6 and the quality of the championship is just continuously getting higher every year. I think Swansea maybe a little bit of a harsh ranking by me. If we've got any Swansea fans, let me know what you think of his ranking in the comments. Now to Huddersfield. Now Huddersfield, without a doubt, they're going to be right up there with the great tier, even above Coventry for me. The fact they were this close to getting into the Premier League again is unbelievable. No one gave Huddersfield a chance to even be close to the top 6. They looked at Corberán. Everyone made their opinions up that Corberán was just not going to be the manager going forward. They brought players in from lower leagues and they made them into even better players, the likes of Nichols and Sorba Thomas. Transfers from lower leagues, and they've been probably 2 of the best players for Huddersfield this season as well. They finished in 3rd place. They finished the best of the rest out of the 2 automatically promoted teams. Now, that is outstanding. Had John Moss seen one of the penalty decisions correctly and given it, then maybe Huddersfield would be a Premier League team by now. But it was close, but it wasn't meant to be. But I've got to say, still, they've got to hold their heads up high. It was an incredible season for Huddersfield Town, and I don't know how they're going to do next year. I think definitely the devastation of how close they were could affect them, but it's ultimately going to be down to how many of their starting 11 they're going to keep, because undoubtedly there's going to be a lot of clubs interested. Now, Reading, awful season for me. Not as bad as Barnsley's, of course, but still an awful season. I mean, the 6-point deduction didn't help for profit and sustainability rules. There was still even whispers that potentially Reading have even broken more rules that the bottom 3 was trying to expose Reading for, but ultimately they did not find out anything wrong for it in the end. And this 6-point deduction just really didn't come at the right time. Panovic obviously had a bit of a hangover with his team going so close getting into the top 6. They were last year, right up there. They had a long unbeaten run and a winning streak as well. But then they dropped out. They finished in 7th. And then this season they've had moments of good form at times, but their squad was cut very thin. And they were placed under an embargo, so they couldn't really sign many players as well. So that squad was cut to the bare bones from what it had, unfortunately. And ultimately, there were a load of mistakes that took place in this season. Paul Ince came in, which I wasn't ultimately too fond on at the time, and the fact he's now going to be the manager for next season, I'm now even not fond with that at all. But having said that, I do think Reading did well to survive, but it shouldn't have got that close in the first place. With that quality in Meite, Zhao, John Swift, even looking at the goalkeepers as well that they've got as well, they should not have been in that position for where they were. So Reading, for me, have had an awful season. Middlesbrough is tricky for me to rank because they ultimately didn't really have too many expectations of being into the top six. There was like a good silent crowd of people that thought that Middlesbrough could have a great season getting to the top six. I thought it was going to be maybe great, but teetering on average when they just missed out. And ultimately they did just miss out. But what is making it difficult for me to rank is obviously the money they spent and the manager they had. I think had they got Chris Wilder sooner, then maybe Middlesbrough would have wrapped up top six. But with the money they spent and the manner they lost out on top six as well. Ultimately, had they beaten Preston, they still would have got it. But it was a very poor way to do it. I still think for me, 7th place, it is a small improvement compared to what they had in the year before. I think they've had an average season, I think. I think that's the best way to put it. Had they got in the top six, it would have been a definite improvement there. But I think when the money's spent, I just don't think, even with a 7th place finish, I can't put it as a great season. You know, the amount they spent on Balogun, where he really did not turn up at all. A couple of their signings didn't really work. Wilder had good moments, but then ultimately he wasn't making this team consistent enough. So, unfortunately, I think they've just fallen short for the great tier. Derby, now, they are relegated, obviously, down to League One for the first time in over 30 years. But I'm actually going to still say it has been the higher part of an average season for Derby. And I'll tell you why. I would even arguably say maybe lower part of great. Ultimately, the reason why they didn't get a great season, for me, it would have been a great season had Derby survived. I think because the fact of the matter is, Derby just don't get relegated to League One regardless of the situation. I know the situation was awful for them to have 21 points, and the fact they didn't even finish rock bottom is amazing, but it just really goes to show how poor Barnsley have been this year. But for me, Derby did have one big chance to get out of it at one stage when they had a good run of form at home especially, but ultimately it was their away form in 2022 that ultimately didn't make them survive. They had 8 away defeats in a row, and that is why they ultimately crumbled under the pressure and they couldn't manage to survive. They finished in 23rd, was pretty close behind Peterborough. Reading got a little bit of breathing space from them in the end of the season. But I think based on the fact that they've had this takeover problems, I think have you ranked it on off the field stuff, it would be awful. But I think on the field, it would be great. So if I'm going to average those two tiers, I think I've got to put Derby in the average tier overall. But I'm hoping for Derby that with the spirit they've shown, the youth players that have shown great promise, Ebiseli being one, Ebiway being another one, Kaskian being another one as well. I'm hoping that they're going to do very, very well in League One and potentially bounce back, because I think Wayne Rooney is one of the best things that's happened to Derby in recent history. So let's hope and pray for Derby fans' sakes that they can go back into the comfort zone that is the Championship. And then to their East Midlands rivals, Nottingham Forest, I mean, they're going to go into the promotion team. I'm actually going to edge them ahead of Forest because obviously we had this narrative where Forest were rock bottom in September. Cooper goes in and completely transforms this team. Unbelievable. What a redemption story as well for Steve Cooper to finally get a team promoted from the playoffs from the third time of asking as well. Yes, the game wasn't great. I wouldn't say Huddersfield and Forest were particularly great going forward. But ultimately, the organisation that Steve Cooper made with his team and how they coped with the pressure was extraordinary. And that gives me a little bit of hope seeing Nottingham Forest return to the Premier League. It's ultimately something that's been over their mind. Nottingham Forest have now got what they wanted, to fight that mentality and to really defy the odds and almost forget about the pressure is extraordinary. So I have to give them right to the promotion team, and I would definitely say better than Bournemouth as well, because I do think their squad is worth less, and I think Steve Cooper's got more out of them. So now we've done to the final 6 teams. I mean, West Brom's going to go down in awful. Maybe not as bad as Barnsley, but it's very close. West Brom with that squad to be a year on parachute payment team and to finish 10th place. Millwall finished above you in 9th place. Blackburn finished above you in 8th place. It's embarrassing. West Brom should have been going for top 2. They really should have gone for top 2. I did think they'd get top 2 because I was a bit worried about the lack of goals I saw in the team, especially with the interest in Ghana and of course Pereira had at that time as well. But little did I know it'd go this badly wrong for West Brom. It has been an awful season and ultimately one season that they ought to forget. Steve Bruce is going to still be their manager next year. I don't really know how I think about that, but we're just going to have to hold our judgment and we'll have a very good idea if that was a good decision at the start of next season. We briefly talked about Millwall and they did finish above West Brom in the end in 9th place. I actually think maybe the lower part of great. I actually think Millwall to even be in the conversation of potentially getting to the top 6 is still a really good season for this Millwall team considering their budget that they have. I think Millwall, especially, in recent years as well, they've been a little bit erratic with their finishes. You get them, in the middle part of the table. You could see them sometimes fight a relegation battle at times. I think Gary Rowett is definitely stabilising things for Millwall. But I would dare say maybe it's making things a bit complacent. But I think with the players that go on that squad, I think he's done so well to even get this squad in the top 10 for a start and to even give him, within a matter of points away from the top 6. I think it's still been a great season. I just don't think as great as Luton, Blackpool, Coventry and Huddersfield. Cardiff, for me, awful. I think awful season sums it up really. I think that squad that Cardiff had, it still had the likes of Kiefer Moore, the players it did have, Mick McCarthy being an experienced manager. It definitely should not have finished as low as it did. Morrison goes in, improves a couple of results at times, but ultimately it's been a very bad season. It's just not felt comfortable at all for Cardiff fans. It's been very inconsistent even when Steve Morrison was in, so the fact he's now their permanent manager. Cardiff fans, let me know what you think about that going forward. Sheffield United, I think it's been average for me. I think average because you would expect Sheffield United with the squad that they had to finish in around the top 6. But I think you also got to factor in the amount that they did finish rock bottom in the Premier League and they had a lot to go over mentally. And I think they did have a huge lack of confidence when Jokanovic tried to take him over and he set this standards very, very early. But Sheffield United crumbled under that and ultimately they just needed a man that they were used to. Paul Heckingbottom tried to get rid of all the standards, really got his team drilled. And the fact they even made a great recovery, I think it does save him because based on the start of the season, it would have been down in the awful tier. But I think overall, a 5th place finish warrants you to have an average season if you are a Sheffield United fan. Peterborough, I'm going to say meh actually. I'm going to say meh. Not awful because obviously I think Peterborough just ultimately wanted to survive and they were the closest out of the 3 relegated teams to survive. They did have a little bit of a gap between them and Reading by 7 points, that is. But near the end of the season when Grant McCann was introduced, I think too late into the squad, he did start churning in some good results for this Peterborough team. Unfortunately, by that time, as I regurgitated, it was just too little too late. And ultimately, by that time, Peterborough already dead and buried. But it gives me a little bit of hope seeing Peterborough back down in League One. I actually do think with the experience that Grant McCann has and gained whole out of League One, he could potentially do the same thing for Peterborough. And that's what they're going to be hoping for. It's just how they're going to cope with the different expectations now. That's going to be a very interesting part of it. Fulham, I mean, for me, best team of the league. So they're definitely going to get into the promotion tier. Enough for me said. But ultimately, getting them promoted still, with the records that they've broken as well. Mitrovic scoring nearly the all-time championship record in terms of its history. In its recent history, he's broken the record there, beating Guy Rittickham's record. Not officially the record in the 20th century, though. But despite that, Fulham in general just been incredible. Harry Wilson, for the fact that he has got double figures in goals and assists, is incredible as well. They've all done so well. Carvalho gone though, and Seri gone. Fulham, what they do need to do, they need to reinvest and get some players in, but not too many players. We've seen what's happened when they reinvest too much and they struggle. But then we saw, last time with Scott Parkin, when they reinvest too little, they go down. They need to find that right balance. And I think Marcus Silva can still cut it in the Premier League. I'm just a little bit nervous with Fulham going forward, but in the Championship, they are an absolute delight to watch. So guys, that is my final tier. Am I thinking of making any changes? I mean, there's a couple I'm still thinking I might, but as of now, I'm going to keep the tier as it is. But guys, let me know of your thoughts and where would you rank your Championship team in this tier in the comments down below. I'll be very interested to know. That will wrap it up today for today's video. If you guys enjoyed it, please give the video a like. It does really help the channel. Please do hit the subscribe button as well. It does really help the growth of this channel. And please also share this channel to as many people as you can. All of that helps too. Now, that'll wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are legendary over Sunny in this video. As always, I'll see you guys soon. Take care, everyone.